Hello, welcome to my top 10 favorite reads of 2023 video. I hope you're doing well. Still a super snowy backdrop. Still a great vibe for me. I just posted all the books I read in 2023 video. I only read 25 books, but you may have understood from that video that I enjoyed the majority of the books I read last year. I wish I would have read more books, but I'm actually really happy with the fact that I enjoyed so many of the ones I picked up. That being said, it made making this list really difficult. Making this top 10 list was really hard. I think the easiest part of it was actually the top 3. The top 3 are they've been pretty clear to me for a while, and you don't get any points for guessing them. The rest of the list feels a little bit more, it was trickier. The rest of the list was trickier. And I think from position 5 or 6 to 10, honestly, I feel like I could swap them around. I could put a lot of those books on any of the positions between 5 and 10, and I'd still be pretty satisfied with the way the list looks. It's very, very tight. But I've landed at a top 10 list that I'm pretty happy with, and I can't wait to share with you guys. I am going to talk about these books starting with my 10th favorite book that I read last year and working our way all the way up to my favorite read of 2023. Classic, I know. Again, absolutely no points for guessing that one. So without any further ado, let's just get straight to book number 10 on my top 10 favorite reads of 2023 list. The book that I ranked at number 10 on my list is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I am a Agatha Christie fangirl. I'm not even gonna deny it or hide it. It's out there in the open. I'm a huge fan of Agatha Christie. Finally, in 2023, I got around to one of her most iconic and well-known stories, Murder on the Orient Express. This is a Poirot story. It's about a murder that takes place on the Orient Express when it gets stuck in a snowstorm. The setting is cold and wintry and so very atmospheric. There's a huge cast of characters, one of which is Swedish, so bonus points for that. A little bit of the oomph in all of the books that I pick up are gone because I am so very familiar with all of the stories because I've been watching the movies since I was a kid. I've seen all of the Miss Marple movies by several of the actresses, and I've seen all of the Poirot movies that David Suchet has filmed. I know the plot of all of the stories. I know the solution to all of the stories. So I am very, very familiar. However, I have always really wanted to read the books as well. I've wanted to get to the source material, and so a few years ago, I started picking up the books of the stories that I liked the most, and I've been slowly working my way through them. I've really enjoyed all of them because I already knew I liked the stories, right? I just wanted to read the original book. In 2023, I picked up Murder on the Orient Express for the first time, and it did not disappoint. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this one. Agatha Christie's books are always quick reads. They're short, but they're also incredibly absorbing. There's a common thing for me whenever I pick up an Agatha Christie book and I start reading, I just fall straight into it. I usually binge these books. I usually don't put them down. I usually read them in 1 or 2 sittings. This one was no different. I had such a good time with this. Could not make this list without including Murder on the Orient Express. The book that I ranked number 9 on my top 10 list was Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton, The Magic and Mayhem of Growing Up a Wizard. Tom Felton is an actor. He famously played Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter movies. He's also had several other roles since then. I grew up with the Harry Potter movies and books, and so there's a very strong nostalgia attached to Harry Potter, the wizarding world, and the actors that brought it to life. And I'm a huge fan of the people that embodied these characters. I also usually really enjoy biographies and autobiographies by and of people that I am a fan of, that I look up to, that I am inspired by. So when Tom Felton revealed he was writing this book, it became one of my most anticipated books of the year. I read this in January, about a year ago now, and I still think about it sometimes. Tom Felton describes his life up until this point in time, so he's in his early 30s now. Obviously, a huge chunk of it is dedicated to growing up on set for the Harry Potter films. Then there's also a large part of it that tackles a lot of things he was going through that I had no idea about. Him struggling with a lot of things and trying to cope and overcome. It felt like a very honest book, a very genuine book. Whether he used a ghostwriter or not, I'm not sure, but it really did feel like it was Tom Felton speaking to me off of these pages. It felt very much like him and his voice. I don't know, I really, really enjoyed my time reading this, and I didn't feel like I could leave it off of my top 10 list. Number 8 on my list is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. The fact that this is a debut novel, that just kind of blows me away. This is a historical fiction novel that is set in the 60s, give or take a few years across that time period, and it follows our main character, Elizabeth Zott. She is a chemist, and all she wants is to be taken seriously as a scientist. She wants to be taken as seriously as her male colleagues. Obviously, she meets hurdle after hurdle, and she goes through quite a bit. I can't tell you what exactly it is about this book that I loved so much, because on paper, it's a book that I should find good, not this great. I've been trying for months, but I cannot figure it out. All I know is that I was so very invested. I did not want to put this book down when I was reading it at all. It read very slow, but somehow it still just had me so hooked. There must be some magic in these pages, because I genuinely can't tell you what it is that I loved so much about it. It might be the found family element of the story. It's not the most obvious or big found family, but there's something about finding other people that see you for who you are and accept you for who you are, and that genuinely like you for you, that encourage you. There are some great friendships in here. It's not always a pleasant story, but there was something heartwarming about it as well. Really glad that my best friend put me onto this. Really glad that she encouraged me to read it. Thank you, Sophia. This has been given an adaptation now, and I haven't seen it yet, but I really, really want to. I'm so excited to see this movie. I hope that they've done it really well. They better not let me down with that one. I hope Bonnie Garmus writes more stuff. I will be picking it up, guaranteed. It was just an excellent piece of historical fiction. Number 7 on my list is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is, as I mentioned in my last video, a cozy read. It's comfort read material. One of those books that when I finished it, I wanted to turn it back to the first page and read it all over again. It's basically about this witch, Mika. She and other witches have to keep very quiet about their witching abilities, but Mika is hired to teach a group of young witches. This job requires her to move into a house that is hidden away and home to a few very interesting, fun characters, and chaos ensues. It's a little bit fantastical, it's a romance, and it's just really cute and sweet and heartwarming. Another found family story that just hit me straight in the feels. It was great. I really, really enjoyed this book so much, and I feel like come autumn I'll be rereading it. It's just so sweet. Number 6 on my list is The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have always been a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings movies. I can't remember a time when I didn't know the story, but I never got around to the books until very, very recently. I picked up The Fellowship of the Ring in 2022, and I finally got to The Two Towers last year, and I really, really enjoyed it. So far, the books are delivering. The movies are clearly very, very faithful to the source material in the books. Since I know the story, there's no surprises really in here. If you've seen the movies, you know the story. If you've read the books, you know the story. There's really not much difference, but I'm still somehow really enjoying my time reading these books. As I said in my last video, if I were to rank the movies, The Two Towers would be my least favorite one. Not a bad movie at all, but it would be number 3 of 3. Of the 2 Lord of the Rings books that I've read so far, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, this one is my favorite, and it took me by surprise. I finished it and realized that I'd really enjoyed this one, even more than The Fellowship of the Ring. I just have now the funniest feeling attached to this book. I'm enjoying the characters as they're portrayed on the page. I'm realizing how incredibly descriptive Tolkien was in his writing, and I totally get those of you who find the books a little tedious, because the descriptions are very, very descriptive, and there is a lot of song and poetry spread throughout that I will admit to skimming sometimes because they get really long. But all of it just adds such an atmosphere and definitely helped make the movies so fantastic. I mean, if the books hadn't been so incredibly detailed, would the movies have been done as well? We'll never know, but I'm putting it out there. I'm just really glad that I'm really enjoying these books. And Return of the King was one of those books that I really wanted to get to before the end of 2023, and I didn't because of the very, very busy weeks I had before Christmas. But it is one of the next books I'm picking up. I will finally be finishing the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I'm so excited for it. I have more Tolkien on my shelf that I can't wait to get to. I don't know, I feel like Tolkien is just one of those authors that I really vibe with. Book number 5 on my list is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. When I was making this list, I was not sure whether I would put The Two Towers or Piranesi on 5 and which one I would put at number 6. And for all intents and purposes, you can consider them sharing the 5th spot because it really doesn't make much of a difference where they're placed. I loved these two both more or less equally. If you saw my last video of the books that I read in 2023, you'll know just how bewildered this book had me because it was not at all what I was expecting it to be. And so I don't really know how to describe this book to you because the way it was described to me feels so inadequate, but at the same time, going into it that blind just is part of what blew my mind, and I don't want to take that away from anyone else. So I don't really know how to describe this other than the fact that we're following our main character Piranesi, who lives in this very, very large, vast, what he calls house, and there's just room after room, corridor after corridor. There are vestibules, there are all kinds of spaces, and all of them have statues in them, and he takes care of this house, and things start happening. And that's all I'm going to say. I didn't even know the right genres for this, not all of them anyway. It was crazy. As I was reading more and more and more, I started questioning more and more and more, and there were just so many interesting elements to the story. As I said in that last video, the only reason that I didn't give this a perfect 5-star rating was because I felt like the ending was a little bit rushed. I wish it had been a little bit more elaborate. I would have given a lot for it to be just a little bit longer and giving us a little bit more of a satisfactory ending. It felt really rushed. But aside from that, I thought this book was perfect. If you haven't read this yet, I recommend you give it a try. It's really short, so it won't take you that long to get through at all. And eventually you'll start flipping the pages faster and faster. Thoroughly enjoyed my time with this. Was so incredibly surprised. It was a really pleasant reading experience, and I was hooked. The book I've placed at number 4 on my top 10 list is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is an LGBTQ romance. It follows the first son of the United States and a Prince of England falling in love. And it's one of these books that got really popular on social media. I stayed away from it for a while because of that, because I don't have a good experience with reading books that grow really popular on Book Talk, for example. But when I saw they were making an adaptation for it, I went on a whim to a bookstore, picked it up, and started reading it that day, and basically binge read it. I was completely enamored by the characters. They were so cool and fun is how I've been describing this book, and I feel like it's a really good description. That being said, one of the characters in particular, the Prince of England, Henry, I related a lot to his character. I related a lot to him as a person, and that particular element had me grow a little bit more attached to the story than I might otherwise have. It was just a really fun read for the summer. It has some awesome characters, and I'm really glad that I read it. We're getting to the medals now. Bronze, 3rd place. Books that no one gets any points for guessing are on this list. It must be pretty obvious, honestly. The book that I placed at number 3 on my list was Babel by R.F. Kuang. This was the first time I read anything by R.F. Kuang, and it will definitely not be the last. Babel is a historical fiction novel, and it's really hard to describe without basically explaining the entire plot, but it's about colonialism, language, translation, history, and it was fascinating. It was emotional. It was educational. I personally am really interested in language and translation in itself. I am so very aware of the limitations that translation often has, the difficulty in choosing the correct wording in order to get the right message across. Sometimes you have to decide between staying true to the actual words and the message that's meant to be conveyed. When I speak to you, in these videos, my mind is constantly translating because I think in Norwegian. You'll notice in some of my videos, in a lot of my videos, the editing is really like I've chopped up pieces, and sometimes a lot. Not all the time, but sometimes it can be really choppy. And it's basically because I have a lot of brain freezes where I'm trying to find the right English words to say and express what it is I want to say and express. And so there are a lot of, when I'm recording, a lot of pauses. A lot of the times I stumble over words because I'm starting to say something, realizing it's not exactly what I want to say, and I start changing what I want to say, and it just becomes a bubble of nonsense. It's something that I'll eventually get better at, I'm sure. Ever since I started making these videos and I notice it in my editing, I've been thinking about this book because I know that the reason that I edit the way I do is because of my difficulty in translating in the moment. So this book has been on my mind ever since I read it, and even more so in the last few months. It was just such an interesting book and so incredibly emotional. I've said that, but I want to underline it too. It was a very emotional story. I feel like it's wrong saying I enjoyed my time reading this because it is quite a heavy story, but when I was reading it, I couldn't really put it down. I was reading and reading. The only time I really put it down was when I wanted to tab. One of my favorite parts of this book were the lessons that the students do at Babel. It was also one of those books where I really didn't see where it was going until we got closer to the end. I was constantly on the edge of my seat, didn't really know what choices the characters would make, what situations they would be thrown into next. It was an unpredictable read. This was a book that I thoroughly enjoyed, maybe especially because one of the themes, namely that of translation and language, is one that just fascinates me so much and that I've always enjoyed. There really wasn't anything I didn't like about this. I mean, it was an excellent read, and I've never read a book quite like this. We've gotten to spot number 2, Silver, if you will, the second best book that I read in 2023. I'm sure that those of you who have watched a few of my videos will know exactly which book this one is. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is a World War II story that takes place in France and Germany. We follow a young French girl and a young German boy. They're around the same age, and we follow them growing up in the years leading up to the war and then throughout the war as well. I have a reading vlog up for this book. I'll link it on the screen, and there are a lot of more or less incoherent thoughts from me on this book in that video. But in summary, I was blown away by the writing, the structure that Anthony Doerr chose to use to tell this story. It was told so well, in exactly the right way. The characters were wonderful. They were so vivid, and I grew so very attached to them so very quickly. This is an incredibly emotional book, and it tackles a whole range of themes that are so interesting. If you read one World War II story, let it be this one because it packs a punch. Despite being 500 pages, I felt like I flew through this. The chapters are really short, which helps with that. We swap perspectives on a regular basis, but they're never boring. It was just a mixture of being incredibly emotional, thought-provoking, and beautiful. So, number 2 on my list, All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Do I even need to be here for spot number 1? I mean, it's absolutely no secret at all. And the only ones who will get away with not knowing what comes in at number 1 are those who have never seen a single one of my videos. I only have like 16 videos, and I feel like I've talked about this one in at least 10, which is impressive, if I do say so myself. The book that I've ranked my favorite read of 2023. You know it just as well as I do. Say it with me. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This absolute banger of a book deserves all of the high praise that I could throw at it. For those of you who are watching this video and have never seen any of my other videos, hello, welcome. I may have read this book for the first time last year, but it became my all-time favorite book of ever before I even finished it. It is just the perfect story. This is the story of Edmond Dantès, who at the very young age of, I think, 18 or 19 years old, is at the happiest he has ever been. He's very successful, he's engaged, he has everything he could possibly wish for. Then he is betrayed, thrown into prison, and spends decades there. He has a lot of faith in people, but eventually he discovers that he was betrayed and swears vengeance. That mission is basically this book, and it is fantastic. This book is enormous. It is 1,200 pages long. However, this was originally written like 150 years ago, and it was released chapter by chapter by chapter. Every chapter is therefore structured in kind of like an episode way with a start and an ending, so it feels very natural to read this book just a few chapters at a time, put it down, pick it back up again, and you're never really lost. So it's definitely not a book you need to rush through. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but it is so engaging. You follow an enormous cast of characters and so many storylines that all end up somehow linked. It took a moment to get a hang of all the characters and their relationships with the other characters and Dante, but eventually you get there. Such a fascinating storyline. It is also set during the early 1800s. It definitely helps if you have just a little bit of knowledge about Napoleon and his relationship with the royalty of France and the opinions that the French had on Napoleon and royalty. Just a little bit of background to kind of help you navigate the beginning of the story. After that, though, you're just along for the ride. It is just an excellent revenge story. There's a lot of great characters, a lot of characters that are just straight up awful, a lot of characters that are just wonderful human beings, some, questions of the morally gray. There's the whole question of proportionality. How far can you really go? How much can you excuse? Is the line ever crossed? That kind of thing. Just a lot of interesting questions and discussions that this book offers. It's an incredibly compelling story, a lot of great characters, a lot of awful characters, and through it all, you're just watching over Edmond Dante's shoulder as things run their course, and it's such a fantastic story. Thinking about it now, talking about it now, I just want to reread it. I've said this before, I know that this is intimidating by its size, but if you want to read this story and it still makes you nervous, the abbreviated version is good too. It cuts out a few of the storylines, but the ones that it keeps stay faithful to the plot, and you don't really lose all that much. If you're into manga, then I can recommend the Manga Classics edition of The Count of Monte Cristo. That's the first edition that I read, and it's what inspired me to read the actual books. Give them a try. I highly recommend them. It's just such a great story, and I could not possibly put any other book as my favorite read of 2023. So, these are the books that I've ranked my top 10 favorite of 2023. If there are any of these books that you haven't read that piqued your interest, know that I recommend them 100% to you. As I mentioned, I had a really great reading year last year in the sense that I read a lot of good books that I enjoyed, and narrowing it down to 10 was difficult, but I'm quite happy with this list. All such great books that I highly recommend to you. So that's it from me for this video. Let me know if you have any thoughts or opinions on any of the books that I chose to include on my top 10 list. I'm always interested in hearing your thoughts, and let me know what your favorite books of 2023 were, if you found any new favorites, and if you have any books at all that you'd recommend to me from your favorites list, then please do so. So feel free to share in the comments. As usual, that's where I'll see you guys. But that's it from me. I hope you've had a really, really nice day. I hope you'll have a really nice week. I'll see you in my next video, and I hope that the book you're reading is a really, really good one. Maybe it'll even end up on your 2024 favorites list. Bye!